Welcome back to Macabre Times. I'm your host, Daniel Harrow. Today we delve into a chilling tale set in the quaint town of Hollowbrook, Kentucky in the year 1846. Here, history breathes in the form of dust-coated buildings and shadowy woods that cradled whispered secrets. On the surface, Hollowbrook seemed like any ordinary town, blessed with rolling hills and an inviting sense of community. Nestled at the end of Maple Lane, the Sinclair family resided in a grand but aging Victorian home. The Sinclairs, Jonathan and Marion, had three children: Elizabeth, the sharp-witted eldest at 16, Henry, a quiet soul of 14, and little Clara, a sprightly 5-year-old with curls that framed her cherubic face. Neighbors would often marvel at the picturesque family, whose laughter spilled like sunlight into the dark corners of their grand, creaky abode. "I remember thinking how lovely they seemed," said Mrs. Everleigh, a local seamstress. "They always had company, their home filled with merriment, but even then you couldn't shake a feeling that something lingered beneath it all." As winter approached, a palpable shift occurred in the Sinclair household. The once vibrant home began to swell with an unsettling silence, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace that flanked the room where the family gathered. But as the nights grew colder, the warmth seemed to wane. Curious murmurs rippled through the town. The fireplace, an old relic of craftsmanship, was said to sometimes flicker and dance, as if animated by some inner force. "I swear sometimes it felt like it had a mind of its own," recounted George, a neighbor who dropped by often. "The way the flames would flicker, it was almost alive. People either loved it or feared it." Some claimed that when the wind howled fiercely outside, strange sounds echoed from the basement below, an eerie cry that sent shivers down spines. Elizabeth claimed she'd heard it as she settled down to read, but dismissed it as merely the house shifting in the cold. Yet conversations among townsfolk took a darker turn. "I noticed Clara spending more time down in that basement even when it was freezing," Mrs. Everleigh mused, concern etching lines on her brow. "Children often find the most peculiar places, but I couldn't help but worry." Though the Sinclairs put on a brave face, glances exchanged between neighbors hinted at collective unease. The season brought an air of festivity but also a certain trepidation. Odd incidents marred the family's once unblemished reputation. Whispers of Clara's peculiar behavior arose. The child who had once been the light of the home would crouch near the fireplace, her eyes fixated on the basement door, as if it contained forbidden secrets. "It was if the house called to her," Jonathan once said, attempting to laugh it off. But the laughter never reached his eyes, which betrayed an underlying tension. Sensing something amiss, nearby families began to stop their visits altogether. "They were not the same anymore," said old Mrs. Hargrove, who had been friends with Marion for years. "It was as if shadows had crept into their lives." For the townspeople, the Sinclairs represented the kind of family they aspired to be. Yet behind closed doors they were becoming a shell of their former selves, and their exterior perfection began to tarnish under the pressure of unresolved fear. Each winter night that macabre cry echoed through Hollowbrook, a reminder that all was not as it seemed. In the following chapters, we will uncover the cracks that began to splinter the foundation of the Sinclair family home, threatening not just their facade but the very essence of who they were. The curious whispers that once erupted in laughter became laden with dread, shaping the dark narrative that unfolded. As winter deepened in Hollowbrook, the chill in the air became more than just a seasonal change. It seeped into the Sinclair home, wrapping itself around the family like a cold embrace. Jonathan and Marion attempted to keep the festive spirit alive, but the laughter that once filled the rooms grew sparse. A dark cloud of unease began to shadow their lives, particularly when Clara, once so jubilant, withdrew into silence. The basement, once an afterthought to the children, took on a haunting allure. "If you ever wanted to find Clara, you could bet she would be down there," Elizabeth shared with a friend she confided in. "I don't understand why she likes it there. It's dark and cold and there are no toys left." The townsfolk were not blind to the changes. As Clara began making fewer appearances outdoors, whispers evolved into murmurs of concern. "What is happening to that child? She's always been so full of life," Mrs. Everleigh observed to Mr. Donnelly at the market. Yet no one dared venture too close to the Sinclair home, fearing what they might discover. Henry, feeling the weight of his family's strain, attempted to reach out to Clara. "I went to the basement once, but it felt wrong," he admitted later, glancing uneasily at the fireplace. "When she plays there, she talks to something, I can't figure out what." It became a consensus among the younger residents of Hollowbrook that ghosts were involved, though that idea was dismissed by the older generation as mere fantasy. Yet the sensation of a presence, something lurking beneath the ordinary, gnawed at the edges of their collective consciousness. The sound of cries echoing from the basement grew more distinct, its cadence haunting and bizarre. "Sometimes I heard it when I was trying to sleep," Jonathan shared with a close friend, his concern evident. "It's not just the wind howling, it's something more, almost like a child crying." His eyes reflected a mixture of fear and helplessness. "I tried to protect my family, but what could I do?" Marian found herself increasingly drawn to the fireside, often watching the flickering flames as if searching for answers. But the fireplace, magnificently crafted yet ominously alive, seemed to mock her despair. "Every night that old fireplace would crack and pop. It felt as if it was whispering to me," she confessed in hushed tones while chatting with Mrs. Hargrove during one of their rare trips to town. "I know it sounds ridiculous, but I can't shake the feeling that it holds secrets." The urgency of their problems reached a climax one evening when a snowstorm swept through Hollow Brook, cutting off all communication with the outside world. The family was bound to their home and the atmosphere became electric with tension. One could almost feel the building energy, something was about to break. As the wind howled like an anguished spirit, Clara deigned to emerge from her basement refuge. She wandered into the living room, her small frame silhouetted against the dim light of the fireplace that flickered ominously. Her expression was vacant and her gaze fixated on the basement door, a portal to the unknown. "It's calling me," she whispered, as if divulging a profound truth. The words fell heavily, casting a pall over the already somber room. Henry, unable to contain his anxiety, questioned angrily, "What does that even mean, Clara? What's down there?" But she only shrugged, her innocence laced with an unshakable certainty that left him more disturbed than before. Elizabeth observed her siblings in silence, feeling as if she were standing on the periphery of a disaster poised to unfold. The walls of their once happy home felt as though they were closing in, burdened with secrets that must not be unearthed. As the storm raged outside, the macabre cry seeped through the house like an unwelcome guest, enveloping them all. It grew more distinct, more urgent, and yet no one dared explore the depths of the basement where Clara often lingered. What lay beneath the layers of dust and dark secrets? They couldn't fathom the horror that awaited them or the fragility of their lives that was about to be exposed. In the following chapters, we will unravel the hidden tensions and the terrifying truths that lay beneath the surface of the Sinclair family, a tale of fear, desperation, and a desperate search for understanding. The very fabric of their lives was beginning to fray, tearing them apart from within. With winter's grip tightening around Hollow Brook, the Sinclair household spiraled further into disarray. The fireplace that once symbolized warmth now flickered ominously, casting shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. The whispers of the townsfolk grew loud enough to drown out the crackling embers, echoing fears that something sinister lurked within the very bones of the Sinclair home. As the days grew colder and nights grew longer, an atmosphere of dread settled like an unwelcome fog. The cries from the basement became more pronounced, every muffled sound resonating like a desperate plea for help. The family had become trapped within their own walls, unable to escape the growing specter of fear that surrounded them. On one particularly frigid evening, a devastating storm swept through, blanketing the town in deep snow and isolating the Sinclairs from the outside world. The snow piled high, muffling the sounds of the night and creating an eerie stillness that lay heavy over the neighborhood. With each gust of wind howling against the windows, darkness seeped into the corners of their lives. Marian, increasingly worn from sleepless nights and spiraling anxieties, pleaded with Jonathan to confront whatever was plaguing their family. "You need to go down there," she urged, shaking with an intensity fueled by fear and desperation. "We can't keep ignoring it, Clara, she's not herself anymore." But Jonathan hesitated. The thought of descending into the dark, confined basement filled him with dread. "What if it's nothing? What if it's just our imagination?" he argued, his voice laced with uncertainty, yet deep down he knew the answer. Just then, a loud crash thundered from the basement, a sound so jarring that it made them all jump in fright. Clara stood at the threshold of the living room, her face pale and wide-eyed. "It wants you," she whispered again, her voice a chilling echo that sent a shiver down Jonathan's spine. In that moment, the fragile equilibrium of their family fractured. Henry, overwhelmed by the events unfolding around him, decided to take matters into his own hands. He grabbed a lantern from the fireplace and marched toward the basement door, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll go," he announced, his voice a mix of determination and fear. "Wait, don't do this," Elizabeth cried, grabbing his arm. "What if it's dangerous?" but Henry shook her off, fueled by an inexplicable urge to face whatever terror loomed beneath. With deep breaths, he reached for the door, its cold iron handle almost freezing against his skin. Taking another moment to steel himself, he swung the door wide, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. The chilling air that escaped felt like whispers beckoning him closer. As he stepped onto the first stair, the wood creaked ominously beneath him, reverberating through the stillness. Clutching the lantern aloft, the flickering flame illuminated only a small patch of the damp walls. "Is anyone down there?" he called, but his own voice betrayed him, echoing back eerily. No answer. Instead, the cries intensified, now unmistakably a child's whimper woven with a distinct urgency. Driven by an instinct he couldn't comprehend, Henry continued his descent, the darkness swirling around him like a thick veil. With each step, the air grew colder, more oppressive. Just as he reached the floor, a gust of wind seemed to sweep through the basement, extinguishing the lantern's flame. Darkness enveloped him completely, and panic surged in his chest. "Clara!" he shouted, his voice strained with terror. "What's happening?" Unfamiliar sounds echoed around him, the whispers grew louder, pulsating through the walls. He felt a rush of fear wash over him as he stumbled back against something hard, a cold stone wall. At that moment his heart raced, the enigmatic energy pressing against him like a physical force. It felt as if unseen eyes were watching. Suddenly, a faint glow flickered in the far corner of the basement, guiding him forward against his will. Reluctantly he approached, finding a pile of old, discarded belongings lit by a gentle, unnatural light. As he sifted through them, his fingers brushed against a dusty book, its cracked spine revealing yellowed pages. Without thinking, he opened it, revealing scrawled words that chilled him to the bone. "To bring forth the forgotten," it read, "one must sacrifice the warmth of love." His breath caught in his throat as the realization sank in. Whatever power had ensnared Clara was tied to something much darker than he could have imagined. The sudden return of the cries overwhelmed him, and he bolted back up the stairs. When he burst into the living room, his family gathered around, apprehension carved into their faces. "What did you find?" Jonathan asked, desperation clinging to his voice. "It's worse than we thought," Henry panted, trembling with the weight of his discoveries. "Clara, she feels it calling to her, there's something down there, a presence." Marian's eyes widened as she glanced toward the basement door. "We have to get out of this house," she muttered, heart racing. "We need to leave now." As they stood there, encircled by shadows, the weight of their reality pressed down upon them, fear, turmoil, and the specter of the basement beckoning them into its depths. In the chilling embrace of that winter night, they realized they were not just fighting an unseen foe but battling the unraveling of their very lives and the horror that held them captive as a family. What lay buried beneath the Sinclair home could no longer be ignored, and the lines between love and darkness began to blur. The tides of their lives were shifting toward a reckoning they couldn't fully comprehend. In the chapters ahead, the truth would emerge, demanding to be faced, no matter the cost. The air inside the Sinclair home felt thicker now, as if laced with a tension that clung to their skin. The revelations of that stormy night sent ripples through their once harmonious existence. No longer could they pretend that everything was fine or that the basement was merely a dusty holdover from an older time, forgotten yet harmless. Jonathan, fueled by a desperate need for answers, resolved to investigate further. The book Henry discovered weighed heavily on his mind, its cryptic messages gnawing at his sanity. That very night, while the children slept, Jonathan ventured into the basement once more, lantern in hand, determined to confront the darkness that had seeped into their lives. As he descended the stairs, the familiar chill enveloped him, and the cries he'd thought had quieted met him once again. He forced himself to breathe steadily, knowing that whatever truth awaited him was essential to understanding what was plaguing his family. Reaching the bottom, he took a moment to gaze around. The flickering light revealed remnants of old trunks, faded clothing, and shattered mirrors. In one corner sat a heavy iron chest, locked and tarnished with age. Something within seemed to pulse as if alive, beckoning him closer. Driven by a strange mix of fear and curiosity, he approached the chest and knelt beside it. With a steady hand, Jonathan worked to pry it open. The lock creaked in protest but finally gave way, the lid creaking open to reveal the contents within. What he found sent a chill down his spine. A collection of journals, each penned in a hurried scrawl describing strange rituals and an unsettling connection to the family that preceded theirs. Flipping through the pages, Jonathan felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The entries spoke of deep-rooted beliefs that intertwined love with sacrifice, adventures into forbidden practices that promised prosperity in exchange for untold consequences. "I will do it for my child," one entry declared passionately. "To bring him happiness and ensure his future, I shall offer what is most precious, a part of my soul." Jonathan's heart raced. "What does this mean?" he whispered into the darkness, the words flaming in the cold air. The implications were profound, suggesting that the very essence of sacrifice was ingrained in their home, twisting familial love into something grotesque. Suddenly, a voice pierced the stillness. "Dad!" Clara's small, timid voice echoed through the gloom. He whirled around, startled, to see her standing at the bottom of the stairs, her innocent eyes wide with trepidation. What had drawn her here? "Clara, sweetheart, you shouldn't be down here," he cautioned gently, his heart pounding, torn between fear for her safety and the magnetic pull of the knowledge he had uncovered. "I heard it again," she replied simply, pointing with tiny fingers toward the chest. "It called my name." The color drained from Jonathan's face. The connection Clara had to that darkness seemed to deepen with every breath. "What does it want?" he pressed, though he felt he already knew the answer. "I think," she hesitated as if weighing the gravity of her words, "I think it wants me to join them. It says I can be happy if I do." Frantically, Jonathan knelt down to her level, trying to understand. "Join who, Clara? What do you mean?" "They are lonely," she explained, her voice a melodious whisper almost drowned out by the swirling darkness. "They need a child to play with." Rising to his feet, Jonathan felt a fury ignite within him, a primal urge to protect his daughter at all costs. "No, Clara, you must not listen to them, they're lying." Though fear simmered within him, he had to remain resolute, striving to shield her from whatever malevolence had claimed her innocence. In that moment, the basement felt alive, suffused with an otherworldly energy that vibrated beneath their feet. The cries transformed into cacophony, their timbre shifting from despair to something far more sinister, echoing off the walls. "Help, we're here," Clara called out, her voice light and carefree as if playing a game. Jonathan's heart lurched as he recognized the peril in her words. "Clara, no, we need to leave," he shouted, reaching for her hand. But it was as if she were in a trance, the basement whispering to her, pulling her deeper into its grasp. The journals began to resonate with the cries, their bindings vibrating in rhythm with the walls, connecting the past to the present. Jonathan felt an overwhelming dread as he witnessed Clara's small frame mesmerized by the dark power radiating around her. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos. Forcing himself forward, he managed to lift her into his arms, turning to retreat toward the staircase. The room seemed to shake, shadows flaring brightly as if protesting their escape. With staggering effort, he sprinted up the stairs, Clara clinging to him tightly. "Let's get out of here!" He burst through the door just as a flash lit the basement behind them, illuminating the horror that had clung to their family for generations. In the safety of their living room, Jonathan set Clara down, gasping for breath. He could see fear welling in her wide eyes. "What just happened?" she murmured, innocence flickering like a candle in a storm. "Nothing, Clara, nothing," Jonathan replied, though his heart pounded in his chest. He knew the truth hovered just beneath the surface, an insidious darkness that had gripped them all. As he looked at his children, he understood they could no longer avoid the truth. To confront the nightmare, they had to understand its origins. The journals held chilling secrets that extended far beyond their family, drawing in chapters of anguish that ran deep within the history of their home. Tomorrow, he would share what he had unveiled with Marian and Elizabeth. As they sought answers, they could no longer remain confined by the shackles of the past. The insistent whispers from the basement had awakened a quest for salvation, a journey through darkness to reclaim the very essence of love that had been corrupted. Now, the struggle against whatever haunted their home began in earnest. The next chapters of their lives would demand courage as they stared into the abyss of history, the only path toward defeating the sinister presence that clawed at their sanity. The dawn that followed was heavy with unspoken truths, an unsettling quiet hanging in the air of the Sinclair home. Jonathan gathered his family, his heart racing as he prepared to unveil the dark secrets contained within those journals. A storm brewed within him, anger, fear, determination, all writhing beneath the surface, demanding to be addressed. Seated around the dining table, the weight of profound horror settled over them. "We need to talk about what I found last night," Jonathan began, his voice steady despite the storm churning in his mind. "The journals in the basement detail a lineage of darkness, sacrifices made in exchange for happiness." Elizabeth looked up, confusion crossing her features. "What are you saying, Dad? What kind of sacrifices?" "They were tied to the families who lived here before us, horrific rituals," Jonathan explained, waving the journal as it trembled in his grip. "It's like they believed in trading love for something they thought could bring joy, but all it did was create a cycle of torment. That's what Clara is hearing, it's calling to her." As his words sank in, the atmosphere turned thick with dread. Clara, sensing the tension, clutched Elizabeth's hand. "It wants me to be happy," she whispered, oblivious to the deeper implications of what her father had just revealed. "No, Clara," Elizabeth said firmly, her voice surprisingly resolve-filled for her age. "It wants to use you." Jonathan's heart swelled with pride and despair. They had to confront this horror, to shatter the silence that had plagued not only their family but the very roots of Hollow Brook itself. With renewed purpose, he decided that their family could no longer bear this burden alone. They needed the support of the whole community, especially given the weight of history that loomed over them. They needed to rally everyone together to take action, to rid themselves of whatever dark force had its grip on their town. "Let's go to Mrs. Everleigh," he declared, and the family nodded in agreement. They climbed the stairs, a mix of misplaced hope and shadowy fear coursing through their veins, every step echoing with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Upon arriving at the bakery, they found Mrs. Everleigh kneading dough, her face lighting up at the sight of them. "Good morning, what brings you here? You all look troubled." "Mrs. Everleigh," Jonathan said, his voice breaking slightly, "we need your help. There's something wrong in Hollow Brook, something dark. We think it's related to our house and the family history tied to it." Each word felt heavy, constrained by years of hidden anguish. The baker paused, a knowing expression crossing her face. "I've sensed it too," she admitted, crumbs of flour falling from her fingers as she set the dough aside. "Those sounds from your home, we have all heard them. It's time to confront this darkness before it claims another child." With that encouragement, Jonathan gathered more families as word spread. Neighbors who had once hesitated stepped forward, united by fear and a shared yearning for their town's safety. Fueled by the collective determination that only arises in peril, they decided to venture to the Sinclair home. As night fell, they formed a procession, lanterns flickering against the encroaching darkness as they made their way through the snow-laden streets. Jonathan led the way, the pulse of urgency throbbing in his chest. This was no longer just his family's fight, it was the entire town's battle against a lurking evil. Once they arrived outside the Sinclair home, the air felt charged with apprehension. Residents gathered around, exchanging nervous glances while holding their lights aloft. They formed a circle, the house looming before them like a menacing shadow. Together, Jonathan called out, his voice echoing against the wooden facade. "We need to confront what lies beneath. We cannot let it claim Clara or anyone else." With that, he turned to the basement door, which loomed ominously, the iron handle cold and unyielding in his grip. The townsfolk followed suit, each taking a moment to breathe deeply, steeling themselves against the unknown. As they descended the steps, the cries began anew, a symphony of despair that threatened to overwhelm them. But Jonathan pressed on, the lantern casting light on the carefully organized old trunks and broken memories sprawled about the basement. He could hear murmurs, half-formed words of encouragement and fear shared among the townsfolk behind him. As they reached the heart of the basement, Jonathan held the journals aloft, the lustrous glow flickering ominously. "This is the source," he shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "We must break this cycle." Marian stepped forward, taking a deep breath as she joined him, wielding her own resolve. "Together, we must eradicate the darkness. No more sacrifices, no more trading love for despair." The townsfolk rallied, their resolve shining like a beacon against the looming shadows. They began to recite words of affirmation and solidarity, each statement manifesting like a shield against the malevolence hanging heavily in the air. The cries crescendoed into a grisly howl, shades of past sorrows igniting the basement in a terrifying cacophony, a whirlwind of emotion unleashed as memories of abandoned children and lost joy clawed at them from the shadows. But as the townsfolk joined in chorus, the sound of their collective voices began to drown out the cries. Together, they turned their backs on the past, standing resolute against the fog of despair that had plagued them for far too long. With a final declaration, Jonathan addressed the darkness head-on. "We refuse to belong to you, we reclaim our love, our joy, our hope." At that moment, the oppressive atmosphere began to shift. The shadows shrank back against the walls and a soft light began to emerge from the depths of the basement, illuminating the powerful energy formed by their unity. As the insistent cries subsided, a final thunderous bell rang through the air like a shattering glass, echoing the weight of generations long held captive. With that, a hush fell over the room, the silence proving profound after years of torment. What remained was neither the void of despair nor the constraints of the past, but a collective understanding that love must always triumph, that compassion could reclaim even the darkest of histories. For Jonathan and his family, the heart of the matter shifted forever. The journey from darkness would lead them toward a path of healing, shaping their legacy in Hollow Brook anew. They had taken that terrifying step toward freedom, and their love could finally flourish. In the aftermath, they could only wait and reflect while the foundations of their home settled into the light reclaimed. The final whispers had quieted, but a new dawn awaited them as a community. It marked the beginning of a brighter future, one where the laughter of children would echo freely, free from the chains of darkness that once held them. The morning sun rose gently over Hollow Brook, illuminating the remnants of a night that had forever altered the Sinclair family and their community. As Jonathan and Marian gathered with their children in the sunlit garden, the weight that had burdened them all seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile yet palpable hope. The townsfolk began to return, drawn by the promise of a restoration that felt almost tangible. Neighbors stopped by unannounced, their laughter filling the air as stories of resilience began to weave through the community. The chilling echoes that had once haunted Hollow Brook faded into whispers of survival, peace, and unity. In the days that followed, the revelations from the basement became catalysts for change. Families opened their doors to one another, each gathering fortified by the shared understanding of what had transpired. They formed support groups, recognizing that the darkness that had once settled over them stemmed from a collective unspoken trauma. Elizabeth, now emboldened by their journey, took the helm in the local school, introducing lessons on empathy, understanding, and the importance of community. "We must protect one another," she declared during a gathering at the schoolhouse, "and ensure that love prevails above all else." Meanwhile, Clara and Henry became symbols of hope, their resilience sparking inspiration in the hearts of younger children. The basement of the Sinclair home, once shrouded in dread, transformed into a makeshift community center where stories were exchanged, laughter echoed, and voices joined in song, an emblem of new beginnings. Marian and Jonathan led a community initiative to ensure that no child felt alone, establishing programs to foster relationships grounded in trust and affection. The sacrifices of the past would not define them. Instead, they were rewritten into a narrative that found strength in vulnerability and connection. As winter melted into spring, the town rallied to erect a memorial near the Sinclair home. A stone marker engraved with the words "In memory of lost voices, in celebration of love," served as a reminder that the bonds forged through hardship could illuminate even the darkest of paths. Jonathan and Marian often visited the memorial where they would sit on the bench beside it, hand in hand. "Do you think we'll ever be fully free?" Jonathan pondered quietly, looking out over the landscape that now shimmered in vibrant colors. Marian reflected for a moment before answering, "Freedom is a journey, not a destination. Each day we choose to love and support one another brings us closer." Years passed, the community evolving and thriving. Neighbors developed relationships that intertwined like roots of ancient trees, growing stronger with time. The laughter of children filled the air once more, threading its way through the fabric of their lives, a testament to resilience. Yet amid the growth, the Sinclair family remained mindful of the darkness that once lurked just beneath the surface. They understood that love must always be tended to, a garden nurtured through care, vigilance, and connection. Jonathan took to recording their stories, meticulously documenting the history of Hollow Brook and the lessons learned from the shadows. His aim was clear: to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not fade into obscurity but be remembered as a foundation upon which they could build. As the town thrived, the echoes of their collective journey were passed down through generations, a legacy grounded in hope and resilience. The town's children would grow up knowing that love in all its complexity must be both embraced and defended. And as the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, casting a warm glow over Hollow Brook, its citizens would gather, a tapestry of laughter and friendship woven thick with shared memories, all underscored by one simple truth. Because what hides behind a perfect smile can be the darkest secret of all.